Man, oh man, what's up, YouTube? I saw a video that really took me back, man. So, for those of y'all that may or may not know, I bear the hammer and sickle on my channel because in middle school, 15 years ago, I followed the communist ideology. And then a year later, when I came across some information that essentially proved that my idols were simply puppets and that they were not the masterminds behind the revolutions that manifested, I had no choice but to abandon my ideology. This is when I was 14, and this is when I realized, pretty early on that, ideal theologies are just, they feed you ideals to take you away from reality, a form of controlled opposition. So I came across this little 13-minute video that talks about Russia's two revolutions because most people they know Russia went from the Tsarism during World War One and then into the Soviet Union afterwards, but they don't actually know that there were two revolutions that took place during this transition and not just one. And the main reason I want to cover this video is because I made a point in my previous one where I talked about how all ideologies will eventually degrade, that the purpose of a revolution is to simply start a new cycle. That's why it's called revolution. The root word of revolution is revolving combined with evolution, right? So as each revolving evolution happens, a new cycle starts in an evolved fashion. Now people say all the time, "Oh, Chris, you take what words mean too seriously." No, the people that rule over you, they hide the truth in plain sight. And one of their favorite things to do is to literally hide the truth in the very words you use every day without ever knowing the true meanings behind it. Because people don't believe in dictionaries anymore. People don't believe in thesauruses anymore. But that's besides the point. So I want to cover this video because Russia went from the Tsarista of Russia. I know I'm saying that word wrong. I don't speak Russian, but the Tsarism of Russia, where the people still weren't free, but they had a lot more freedom than, like, before the revolution, they had a certain level of freedom, but then after the first revolution, they lost freedom. Then after the second revolution, they pretty much lost all their freedom, right? So it's the illusion of change while your condition gets even worse. So let's start the video. And shout out to this YouTube channel, Epic History TV. They make some good stuff. Should never agree to represent a form of government because I would consider it harmful to the people who God has entrusted to my care. Tsar Nicholas II. Now, what he's talking about is the concept called divine right, how the belief is that God picked certain bloodlines to rule over humanity. And this originated because after a certain period of time, in order to be crowned into royalty, the Pope himself would have to, like, kiss your crown, bless your crown, and crown you. That's how Napoleon was crowned emperor. That's how the Holy Roman Emperor was also coronated, because the Pope himself, God, is giving you permission to rule over humanity. That's where the concept of divine right, well, at least in the West, it goes deeper than that. The concept of divine right is thousands of years old, but specifically for Western culture, this is the origin. So, just a little history for you fuckers.
In 1894, Nicholas II became ruler of a Russian empire that stretched from the Baltic to the Pacific, inhabited by 126 million people from 194 ethnic groups. It was a country in which workers and peasants...
It's crazy when you think about it, because when you consider that the population of Russia right now is only, like, barely higher than that. I think there are around 200 million people right now. And this is like 100 years later, 120, 30 years later. when you look at how the population of other countries around the world have increased 3, 4, 5, sometimes sixfold, where Russia, they barely had like a, 60, 70% increase, that should give you an idea of how much death has happened in Russia during this time period. From like the 1800s to like the late 1900s, there was a lot of death in Russia. As a result, their population didn't really grow that much compared to everybody else. I mean, countries like Japan went from like 30 million to 200 million in the same time period, right? So, but I digress.
A country in which workers and peasants lived in poverty and hardship, while Russia's elite, its imperial...
I'm not even gonna cap. I didn't realize like how old filming and photography technology was. Like that's actually the Tsar of Russia, and this is like the 1900s, and apparently they had video back then.
Family and aristocracy
this is pretty good quality.
Lived lives of gilded luxury. There was a long history of struggle in Russia against the injustices of the system.
Essentially, the peasants getting angry that the nobility, that the ruling hierarchy lived what they would perceive to be perfect lives while they lived as slaves, right? Ironically, that still happens to this day. People only have the illusion of freedom now, though.
And in 1905, a revolution forced the Tsar to allow the creation of a State Duma, or National Assembly.
Pay careful attention to what he said. A revolution forced the Tsar into agreeing to an assembly. What this basically means is that this was the start of a new cycle. The previous cycle was the Tsars ruled absolute monarchy with absolute authority due to God's divine rights, and this evolution, this evolving cycle, the new cycle is now the Tsar is going to rule and the assembly is going to have the illusion of power, which is going to cause another revolution, which is going to cause another cycle. All hidden in plain sight. Remember, I made countless videos about this. The purpose of the game is to keep you trapped in it forever.
But its power was limited, and the compromise pleased neither the Tsar nor the reformers. In 1914, this divided empire was plunged into fresh crisis by World War.
What's all this talk about the people's confidence? Let the people merit my confidence.
World War I was a disaster for Tsarist Russia. At the front, the country suffered a series of devastating...
I'm tripping off these pictures, man. These are really good pictures. Like, wow.
...defeats. While at home, there were food shortages and economic chaos. The Tsar was held responsible for the crisis. After all, he was now the army's commander.
It's kind of surreal to think that most of the people that are in this footage are dead right now.
...in chief, and he was standing in the way of government reform. His German-born wife, Empress Alexandra, was even thought to be...
For those of you red pillars that talk about, oh, if you're not 6 foot tall, women won't look. Look at Tsar Nicholas. He's shorter than his wife. But he's got money and status.
...be supporting Germany,
the red pillars
while the entire family was said to have fallen under the spell of a Siberian mystic and faith healer, Grigory Rasputin.
Legend.
In December 1916, Rasputin was murdered by Russian aristocrats, possibly with the help of British secret agents, both groups determined to end his influence over the Tsar. But in the eyes of many, the damage had already been done.
The cycle has already started. The second you have a revolution, you have begun a cycle that is not going to end until the intended goal of that revolution has been fulfilled. And the intended goal of the first revolution, so really it's 3 revolutions, right? The revolution that he talked about before this video, and then the 2 he's going to mention in the video. So situation serious. There's anarchy in the capital. Government paralyzed, chaotic shooting in the streets. And remember, what is a popular saying that those that rule over you use? Create order among chaos. So first they cause the chaos, then establish order among the chaos. And notice at the revolution, chaos. Then order is established. A cycle begins. Then more chaos happens. Another revolution happens. More order is established until these people slowly lose their freedom. What little bit of freedom they had in the first place, anyways.
On the 23rd of February 1917,
So much red.
thousands of women took to the streets of the Russian capital, Petrograd.
I'm going to cover this in my Fall of an Empire video because a common thing that happens when empires fall is that the men get weaker. This allows the chaos to happen in the first place, because when you have a society of nothing but strong men, it's hard to create chaos because the men are naturally maintaining order with their powerful presence. But when men get weaker, women have to become the men. When men get weaker, that's when empires fall. Now, shout out to these ones. People think I'm sexist or whatever because they misinterpret what I say. I love strong women, man. Some of my favorite heroes are the Onabushi of Japan. Whether or not they were mythical or if they actually saw a battle, like, I've always been a fan of strong women. But unfortunately, I have to acknowledge when women are starting your revolution, that is a sign that the men themselves have gotten significantly weaker. And this usually happens when there's peace, right? Because when men are living peaceful lives, they lose that strong instinctual energy, right? So, like with all falls of empires, the women are starting this revolution.
To mark International Women's Day and protest over bread shortages. The next day, they were joined on the streets by workers and students carrying...
Yeah, because the men are like, well, wait a minute, we're not going to let the women fight our battle. We're not going to let our mothers and daughters and sisters die for us. We're going to join them and unify. Which shout out to the Russians. This is one of the few times in history they unified together.
Placards that read, "Down with the Tsar." Troops ordered to put down the disorder mutinied and joined the protesters instead.
Yeah, because when revolutions happen and when you get dethroned, it's not that the people themselves are storming the capital, it's that you've lost control of your keys, so your soldiers let the people dethrone you. Right? You've lost loyalty of your soldiers, which means you lost loyalty to the key that was in charge of your soldiers. There's a video called Rules for Rulers. Go check that out. I may cover it as well in a future video.
Tsarist officials were arrested. Prisons and police stations were attacked. Emblems of Tsarist rule smashed and burned. The government had lost control of the capital. The Tsar was told by his ministers that order could only be restored and Russia saved from military defeat if he gave up power. So,
look at him, his morale is totally broken. And that one guy over there is like, oh my god, I can't believe this is actually happening.
On the 2nd of March, Nicholas agreed to abdicate. In just 10 days, 300...
Oh my, Eagles. As above, so below. Hidden in plain sight.
years of Romanov
He even got a 33.
rule had come to an end.
The provisional government does not possess any real power. Of course not.
The February Revolution had been remarkably swift and bloodless, and hopes were now high for the creation of a more democratic, more just Russian state. Members of the State Duma,
Democrat, the illusion that sheep have power.
the National
My
Assembly,
bad, democracy, the illusion that sheep have power. Or as one of my track coaches called it, a demonocracy.
had formed a provisional government, which was to hold power until a constituent assembly was elected, to give Russia a new constitution. But in reality, the provisional government
Now, people have got to ask the following questions. how did these people get into power for the provisional government in the first place? Did they just randomly select a bunch of people off the street and be like, hey, everybody, we're going to write a constitution. Who wants to be in charge of the provisional government? So how did these people even get those? Because just you guys got to think about this logically, right? They literally just dethroned the government. So how in 10 days did they go from anarchy and chaos to, oh my God, we got this provisional government? So how did these people get selected? How did they decide how many people were going to get selected? What's the role of each of these individuals? And like, just questions you got to ask, man. I don't know. Almost sounds like a Hollywood script.
Shared power with the Petrograd Soviet, a council elected by workers and soldiers.
Yeah, controlled opposition.
That controlled the capital's troops.
Like, at the beginning of each cycle, you have to establish different sides to keep people divided, right? Keep in mind, these fuckers are still at war. They did not withdraw from World War I. So on the front lines, their soldiers still fighting and dying. But instead of making just one unified political party, one unified government, they had to make more chaos first. So they actually made three sides: the provisional government, the Petrograd Soviet, and the Bolsheviks, right? Got to have three sides fighting each other to create more chaos, to establish another revolution, to establish a future order, to take away more and more people's freedoms. Because I want you guys to realize, right? They already said that soldiers are already shooting people just for even looking like they're going to protest, right? So they're conditioning people to already have a limited sense of freedom. The people are already used to getting shot at by soldiers and police. So the type of freedom they're used to is already right here. And what each of these revolutions are doing, because Russia had 3 in this time period, what each of these revolutions are doing is taking more and more and more and more and more power away from the people while pretending to do the opposite.
Troops, transport, and communications. The Petrograd.
And the reason I wanted to cover this again is because when empires fall, this is exactly what happens. People that live in America think this currently isn't happening to them. You know, we get less and less freedoms each year, but, you know, the people that rule over you say they're doing the opposite and giving you more freedoms.
Soviet, dominated by the Socialist Revolutionary Party and the Marxist Menshevik Party, was much more radical than the provisional government. Yet it supported the government's decision to continue the war and honor the commitments that Russia had made.
Now, why did they want the war to continue? Because while they were consolidating their power in inner Russia, most of the provisional government soldiers were still out fighting the war.
Aid to the Allies.
The most dangerous enemy is the one that is in front of you that you never see. Always remember that.
It was a fateful decision that ultimately played into the hands of one of the smaller parties, the Bolsheviks. Their leader, Vladimir Lenin, recently returned from 16 years in exile, bitterly opposed the imperialist war. He also demanded the immediate redistribution of land, from rich landowners to peasants, and the transfer.
I was actually mind-fucked that they had footage of Vladimir Lenin speaking.
Of power from the bourgeois provisional government to the people's soviets or councils that were springing up across Russia. The Bolshevik program was summed up in a simple slogan: bread, peace, and land. And as Russia's economic and military crisis deepened, its appeal to the masses grew and grew.
Yeah, because when you really think about it, Russia is so fucking big that each person in Russia could really have their own chunk of big land. So, as well as the, you know, resources from that land to grow their own food. So, our tactic, absolute distrust. No support for the provisional government.
In June,
Lenin is also the person that donned the term controlled opposition. He said around the same time period, the best way to control opposition is to lead it. You be the judge.
a new Russian military offensive ended in disaster, with 400,000 Russian casualties, massive desertions, and the collapse of army morale and discipline. In July, soldiers and sailors in Petrograd mutinied. They were joined in the streets by workers with Bolshevik support.
It's almost kind of crazy when you think about it. These people were so tired of people dying and so angry at the fighting. So what's their solution? Let's have more fighting and cause more death. Can't make this shit up, bro.
But troops loyal to the provisional government opened fire on the protesters.
Yeah, getting them used to police just doing whatever they want and shooting massive crowds. You know, basically establishing the freedom threshold is like right here, and it's going to get even lower as the revolutions continue.
And dispersed the crowds. A police crackdown followed, leading to the arrest of several Bolshevik leaders, including Leon Trotsky.
You really have to feel bad for the people born in this time period because they basically have to go through 200 years of dictatorship before they really know what, you know, better lives look like.
While Lenin, with the help of Joseph Stalin, fled to Finland, traveling with forged papers under the name of Konstantin Ivanov.
A pun off of the Western Roman Empire.
A socialist
The Eastern Roman Empire.
and stirring orator named Alexander Kerensky became Russia's new prime minister.
The Soviets had some, they weren't the Soviets yet. The Russians had some nice uniforms.
And was hailed as the man who would save Russia from anarchy.
Hang the German supporter spies with Lenin at their head and disperse the Soviet. I mean, just look at the mentality of what was going on. This is controlled opposition at its finest. These people were fighting a fucking war, yet they're worried about spies 2,000 miles from the front lines. It's crazy.
The army's commander-in-chief, General Kornilov, believed Russia's war effort was being undermined by chaos at home.
Root word of belief is lie. Although he's right, create order from chaos.
And deliberately sabotaged by men like Lenin, whom he declared a German spy. So in August, he ordered his men to march on Petrograd to restore order.
Where's he getting all these soldiers from?
Bolsheviks played a leading role in the city's defense against this attempted military coup. Their most brilliant organizer, Leon Trotsky, was released from prison and sent armed Bolshevik militias, the Red Guards, to defend key points in the city.
That was a fucking kid. That guy on the right looks like he's 15 years old, man. Oh, that's where they're getting the soldiers from, because now they're recruiting literal kids.
Strikes by railway workers, many of them Bolshevik supporters, prevented Kornilov from moving his men by rail. And his soldiers began to switch sides, or simply go home.
Go home! Go big or go home!
The Kornilov affair cast the Bolsheviks as saviors of the revolution.
For a country that was supposed to be having food shortages, there sure are a lot of fat people in these photos.
Saviors of the
Just
revolution. And by the end of September, they'd gained a majority in the Petrograd Soviet. In October, Lenin decided the time had come. He secretly returned from Finland to Petrograd.
Who died and made Lenin in charge through all of this? I'm just saying. Like, did they vote on this, or did he just say, I'm in charge, bitch, bow down to me?
And began preparing to seize.
Now keep in mind, he was exiled for over a decade, so how did he just... you be the judge.
Power.
Oh, Lenin.
On the 25th of October, the Bolsheviks made their move. Red Guards and loyal troops seized key points around the capital, and that night they stormed the provisional government's headquarters at the Winter Palace, an event later immortalized by Bolshevik propaganda and the great Soviet filmmaker Sergei Eisenstein. Kerensky fled the city at the last moment, narrowly avoiding capture. And the next day, at the Second All-Russian Congress of Soviets, Lenin announced the overthrow.
Notice Stalin in the background, and notice Trotsky right behind him.
Of the provisional government.
I mean, he is right. Revolutions happen.
The following months saw the Bolsheviks consolidate their hold on power, while fighting a brutal civil war against counter-revolutionary, or White Russian, forces who had foreign support. Some whites hoped to put Tsar Nicholas back on the throne. After his abdication, Nicholas and his family had been held on.
Imagine being a king having to shovel snow. Oh, how the mighty have fallen.
A guard at Tsarskoye Selo, outside Petrograd, where they occupied themselves with gardening and other diversions. In summer 1917, the family was sent to Tobolsk in Siberia, where they lived under house arrest in the governor's mansion. The following spring, the Bolsheviks had the family moved to Yekaterinburg. In July 1918, as white forces approached the city, Bolshevik soldiers gathered the whole family in a cellar.
How did they fucking get all the way? Like, this is like fucking thousands of miles these soldiers were traveling, and there was supposed to be a food shortage, so how do a bunch of starving soldiers travel 2,000 plus miles to go look for some guy living in the middle of nowhere? You know, either they had strong fortitude or, I don't know, man, probably some Hollywood script writing going on.
The Tsar, his wife, their son Alexei, their 4 daughters, Olga, Tatiana, Maria, and Anastasia, as well as 4 servants, and executed them all.
Poor child. They were born to die.
Russia's Civil War was one
Oh, look, a son.
of the 20th century's most devastating events. An estimated 2 million soldiers lost their lives, while a typhus epidemic and famine claimed the lives of a further 9 million civilians. By the end of
That's not even counting how many people died in these revolutions.
1921, the Bolsheviks had emerged victorious, and under Lenin's determined and uncompromising leadership, set about building a new socialist order.
I want you guys to think carefully about what just happened. They had one revolution to lower the absolute monarchy's power. Then they had another revolution to get rid of the totalitarian monarchy's government, because clearly the first revolution didn't have the intended effect among the sheep. It had the intended effect among the elite. And then what happened? An even bigger totalitarian government that surpassed the other two was established with the third revolution. Again, revolve, evolution, an evolving, revolving cycle. Revolve. It's all a cycle, guys. When one empire falls, another one rises to take its place. The terminology is different. This empire wasn't called a Tsarism. This empire was called the Soviet Union. You know what I'm saying? The American Empire was not called the American Empire. The American Empire was called the United States of America. And when the American Empire falls, it'll probably be called the American Dominion or some shit. I don't know. Let's finish the video.
The Soviet Union, created in 1922, emerged as a world superpower following the defeat
Hey,
of
that's the image I used in my last video.
Nazi Germany in World War II. But it would always remain a single-party state, where all opposition or dissent was ruthlessly suppressed.
Even more totalitarianism, even though the 3 revolutions allegedly were started to end totalitarianism. Oh, the irony. They lost more and more freedom with each revolution.
Those brief hopes for Russian democracy that flowered amid the euphoria of the February Revolution were extinguished by the Bolshevik October Revolution. And
it's almost like most people don't actually want freedom in the first place to decide their own fate. It's almost like people just naturally want some ruling hierarchy to decide their fate for them. I mean, just think about this logically. If these people wanted true freedom, why did they establish another dictatorship? What they really wanted was another dictatorship that was better than the previous one, in their minds, right?
put beyond reach for decades to come. Bridgman Images are the leading supplier of art, culture and historic images and footage, representing many of the world.
Alright, this is just an advertisement, so. Alright guys, I hope this video was informative and I hope you guys learned something, man. It's all a cycle. The only thing you get is the illusion of change. Catch y'all in the next video where I talk about the fall of an empire.